Get 6 months of local news for just $2. You get unlimited access to the news and information you need to stay connected to your community. Visit inforum.com/subscribe to get 6 months of local news for just $2.
You're listening to Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. I'm your host, Rob Port. If I sound distracted, it's because I've been busy covering this story all morning. I'm joined by my co-host, Chad Oban.
He's right of center, I'm left of center, both sides of the political spectrum.
I think it's cathartic. I think it's a necessary and proper debate. I'm glad we're having it.
And honestly, we have to do better.
Okay, I don't know why I'm getting blamed for this, right? Welcome to Plain Talk. Boy, start right off the bat. Can't say the name of the show right. Welcome to Plain Talk, where we're
what an impressive start, Port. I mean, come on.
Just tripping over my
You're
own
a professional communicator, for God's sakes.
I am. I don't know what's going on, other than to say it's the holiday season, and I don't know. Maybe I'm a little checked out. Hey, we're going to be talking about investments now. Investments in North Dakota have made the news and maybe not so great ways. And I think part of the problem is that North Dakota invests a lot of different types of money in a lot of different ways. But I think the public perceives it more monolithically than it is. But we sometimes get some negative headlines about investments that don't work out, or maybe investments that are done. There's some stuff going on with Mr. Wonderful and the Wonder Fund, and that's making some negative headlines. That being said, there is a larger effort at play here. There is I don't know what you want to call it, a philosophy, an approach that a majority in our state government has adopted. And I would describe it essentially as investing in North Dakota. There's a lot of different ways and a lot of different programs, but essentially it's taking the money that the state has, and in particular what we're going to be talking about today is the Legacy Fund. It's taking those dollars and investing them in ways that aren't necessarily about maximizing returns, although returns are still certainly important, but focused on how can we invest ways that get a return for the fund, but also promote some of the economic things we want to, economic diversification, bringing jobs, bringing workers to North Dakota, those sorts of things. Here to talk with me about that is Representative Jonathan Warrey from Casselton. Representative Warrey, how are you?
Doing well, Rob. Thanks.
Also, Representative Glenn Bosch from Bismarck, who is a part owner of the Bismarck Larks and can now count Governor Kelly Armstrong as a guest coach in the upcoming season. Representative Bosch, how are you?
Now you jumped all over my last question here. Representative Bosch, any chance you think the governor would need a couple assistant coaches? I know you're not hands-on, you're an owner, but I think Rob and I would be great assistant coach, maybe first and third base coaches, something like that.
I wouldn't vote against you. Let's put it that way. But I think there's a long list of people that want to be standing on those spots.
What a diplomatic answer that was. I was wondering about the separation of powers. You're going to be the governor's boss for a hot moment.
just so there's no question about it, my role as in ownership of the Larks and now the Ditch Chickens is purely to test the hot dog satisfaction level at the ballpark. So
that's usually that may be the only thing I'm qualified to do in a baseball park.
Well, before we leave this important subject, I assume the governor checked with the Ethics Commission before signing that contract with the Ditch Chickens. I hope that was covered.
I think we should make the Ditch Chickens name permanent. To be honest with you, I like that.
I got a couple of texts. People weren't familiar with the term ditch chicken, so I had to explain to them that was a pheasant. So I think after the one game we're going to go back to the Larks. Everybody seems to think the Larks is a pretty good name.
I like weird small ball baseball names. As a fan of the Minot Hot Tots, it's near and dear to my heart. Okay, we're not talking baseball. We're going to talk investments. Gentlemen, Glenn, first of all, let's set up the Legacy Fund. I think this is something a lot of people in North Dakota talk about, the Legacy Fund, and it always comes up as the magic the magic piggy bank that we can use to do whatever it is a given person wants to do. But set us up. What is it? What was the original intent when we created this thing?
Sure. So think back to the 21st session, and we passed House Bill 1425, and at that moment, we established North Dakota's in-state investment program, which at the time, and probably still is the second largest in-state investment program in the country. Really second only to California, but in terms of GDP, the state's GDP, it's far and away the largest in-state investment program in the country. So upon passing the bill, it established that 20% of the legacy fund would be used for in-state investments. It didn't really, other than saying that 10% would be for equity investments and 10% for state or for fixed income investments, it really didn't tell us how to do it and didn't really set any parameters. So about that time, at that time then, and currently the Rio is handling the investments of the legacy fund, and they were charged with coming up with a plan. And I think at the time they felt like they really didn't have the skill sets to handle the in-state investment program, so they went out on an RFP, and then through that process established a relationship with 50 South, which would handle the equity side of the investments. Kind of running parallel to that, the Legacy Fund Advisory Board set up the parameters, kind of the rules of the road a little bit, and how much money could be invested in a certain opportunity, how quickly we would deploy the money, all those kinds of parameters. And so then that whole process took about a year, and we made our first in-state investment probably I would say in the end of 2022. Fast forward today, we've got the program all stood up. It's really remarkable when you think that in 2022, we had no in-state equity firms operating in the state to where we are right now, where we have 3 that are domiciled here. We've got 8 firms that are out there looking for opportunities, and we've deployed $125 million in equities up to this point.
Representative Warrey, you've probably heard us talk on the show. Thank you for listening, by the way, and texting the show. You've probably heard us talk some about some misses, right? When we talked about Mr. Wonderful, we've talked about some of the companies on the eastern part of the state. And I think one other thing that Rob and I agree about, not to continue using the baseball analogy, that we need to keep swinging, right? I mean, you need to swing, you need to take some chances because eventually you're going to get some hits, but we don't talk enough about the hits. So can you talk about that a little bit? I mean, what are some of the success stories, knowing we've only been doing this for 3 years or so, but are there some stories that we should be talking about that are like, hey, this is working?
Absolutely. And Chad, to create a distinction between, investing in the Wonder Fund, that came from one-time ARPA dollars to the Department of Commerce. And that does get confused with legacy fund principal investments that were never made.
That's what I was talking about at the beginning. I think the public sometimes looks at this stuff monolithically, and I mean, I think that's the risk sometimes, because when the Wonder Fund's making negative headlines, that's going to impact all of the state's investment strategies in terms of public opinion.
That's correct. So just to create a distinction there, in the legacy fund, and 50 South Capital has a significant amount of experience in doing due diligence around companies, investing in firms that they see as very effective capital partners. And then Grosvenor has that experience with real asset investments, pipelines, electronic transmission, real estate, et cetera. So those are 2 distinctions. One gets a chunk of dollars. 50 South gets up to $250 million. Grosvenor gets up to $150 million. But and I won't use company names, but there's when I saw the information about one of the companies that did ultimately go bankrupt and the state loses, single 7 figures on it, but still a meaningful amount. I just want to say, you know what? There's a whale that's coming that we got a return on that's 10 times bigger than that. In one of the, but until that executes, that we can't say that, but that will dwarf the loss from the Grand Forks company when we get the exit on that other investment. Other positives, Chad, is, there's been 1,600 jobs created through these 50 South investments. There was a garage door store that for sure in West Fargo, a manufacturer that was for sure going to get sold outside the state, and with it go the good knowledge worker jobs and production jobs. But instead, and the owner said, I'll only sell if the state of North Dakota is involved and this capital company is involved. And you're right, we don't tell those successes very well. Way easier to focus on the negative, but we've got about 4 or 5 really big wins in the state that will get returns on 3 to 5 years from now.
So how do we do a better job? And this is a member of the news media here talking, and I understand our propensity is to cover plane crashes, not safe landings. And I don't know what to do about that. I mean, nobody wants to read an article like this program is working exactly how it's supposed to work. That's just not really a lot of times what the public's interested in. But how should the state, I mean, is there a way that some of this stuff could be more, and this is something I wrote about recently I do feel like we need a database to sort of quantify a lot of the economic development, who's getting the economic developments, whether they're local, like property tax abatements, or, maybe some statewide, like a loan program or an investment program. So people could look up a company and understand what is the taxpayer's involvement in this company. I mean, is it transparency? How do we tell those stories better?
Oh, Rob, I think about what you asked there about a database, and I actually think that is something that we should do. But the one thing we have way too many programs that are stood up right now. I asked somebody one time how many the economic development programs we had in the state, and I heard the number 108. Well, that's too many. And so I think if we narrowed our focus a little bit down to a reasonable number that we're strategic and we're focused on certain things, we wouldn't have so many of the misses that we end up talking about all the time. And I think that would, if I was going to focus on something, I'd try to consolidate some of those economic development programs that sometimes get confused with what happens with the in-state investment program, because they are different. They're separate, but they end up getting all combined into one conversation.
So how do we go about, I mean, the consolidation argument seems really interesting to me. Because I think it would make this whole thing more effective, maybe less costly to the taxpayers in terms of administration, more transparent to the taxpayers, but also more effective. And I wonder, I write about our state government for a living. I didn't know until I was writing some stories of, in relation to the gubernatorial campaign last year. I was shocked to find out how many different economic development programs we have just at the state level, not even counting, what may be going on down at the local level. And so, the consolidation thing makes some sense. How would we achieve that? I mean, is there a way to just run everything through the legacy fund, or what does that look like?
Oh, I think you have to separate. The role of the legacy fund and the in-state investment program is we've got to get a return that's comparable to what the return would we get on other investments, because the earnings that we get from the legacy are important for so many different things. I think on the economic development side, I really think that Commerce plays the most important role there, and they've got new leadership in Commerce, and I think he believes that we've got too many programs, and it's really confusing for people that are looking at the state for different economic development opportunities. They're confused by as many as we have too, because we send one person from one place to another, and it's just not a good process that we have right now. So I really think Commerce plays a big role in how we maybe roll something out that looks different next session.
Yeah, so a follow-up to that is, we have all these programs, and I'm looking at 2 people who are in the state legislature who've set up these programs over the last several decades. I think part of it is the way we do legislation, right? You get to the end of the session, you've got that Commerce budget, you formerly have the OMB budget, and people are like, oh, let's set up this program for $500,000. Let's set up this program. And then it doesn't feel, and please tell me how I'm wrong, that we don't do the due diligence to follow up to see, are these programs working or not? And now we have this mess of 100 and some odd programs. So I don't feel like waiting until the legislative session to sort of figure out how to consolidate this stuff is a really good way to actually do it. So what's happening now, Representative Warrey, Representative Bosch, to look at those programs and see which ones are I mean, you guys both remember the end of last session, or maybe it's 2 sessions ago, when folks were standing up and going line by line through the commerce budget, and it was aggravating and nauseating because it happened multiple days in a row. But that conversation actually is a pretty important conversation to look at these individual programs. So what is happening right now to sort of look at these things and to start that consolidation conversation now rather than next January of 2027?
I'm not involved with anything right now. It's something that I want to focus on, though, Chad. I agree. It's really important. We've just got too many programs, and with the questions that I asked during last session was, how are we measuring the success? And when we leave and we put in place one of those programs, we don't really have a great way of doing that. Yep. I will say, though, that the in-state investment program is actually going to play a role in that, because in the past we didn't really have, since we had nothing set up to help our entrepreneurs move forward, we as legislators or state agencies or the executive branch felt compelled to do something on their own. And I think that's where we ended up with so many programs, is that we couldn't point someone to a generator or some of the other funds that we have established with the in-state program. So in absence of any of that, we did it all on our own, and that just wasn't a really great way to do it.
Well, let's talk, because the in-state, Jonathan, the in-state investment program, I think people just think of this as the legacy fund buys stock in companies. And there's some of that, but there's different, like the North Dakota Growth Fund is sort of that, where we're investing in startups, help them get up off the ground, and then we get a return from that. But there's also the purchase of real assets, so like commercial property, or investing, I guess would be the better way to say that, commercial property or agriculture land. There's also, basically investing in lower interest loans where we're lending some money out, but it's maybe at a below market rate to help a business get started, and then we get some returns from that. And then also, one of my favorite is the infrastructure revolving loan fund, where, I mean, there's stuff, county governments or local governments, they got to build roads, they got to build other types of infrastructure. They have to finance. What if the state of North Dakota finances that itself? The legacy fund gets returns, but we can also do it faster and cheaper for the locals. The taxpayers are winning on both ends. These things just make sense. And it seems like the better we get at them, the more we can sort of plug other things into them and do it. But that just seems like a really strong foundation for this to me. I look at this, I am very, very gratified, very satisfied that this is the right approach.
Yeah, me too. And just to point to Chad's question, which is a fair question on the 108 programs, how are you going to make sure they're effective? How are you going to have less waste? How are you going to bet on less losers? But that is completely distinct from the legacy fund's diligence.
Understood. Yep.
And so we're using fund professionals to help do this diligence. And what's happened is capital companies, 3 of them have now set up their corporate headquarters in North Dakota, because there's an ecosystem. Then there's a business incubation center called Generator that operates out of Fargo right now, but has satellite work. And they are helping people get investor ready and helping them optimize their business models. And so, hey, anybody can invent something, but to actually operationalize it, make it ready for investment, make it so you can be a good boss to employees, there's more to starting a business than in creating value for the consumer. And so that's part of what the Growth Fund is investing in, is that infrastructure for business optimization. What excites me about that is I think our kids can live in North Dakota and not necessarily operate. We're going to have some diversification of our economy because we've made these investments like this. So I'll pause there.
Yeah, and I'm glad Rob pointed out the infrastructure revolving loan fund, because again, I think that's something that helps with property taxes, right? I mean, these are things that maybe people don't connect the dots that are sort of forward thinking. I think about things like the Common Schools Trust Fund and other investment, like us sometimes saving money helps the taxpayers in the long run. And again, I think that's a hard thing for people to wrap their heads around when they just see a big bottom line. But Jonathan, I want to ask about the 50 South Capital and GCM Grosvenor. So are those 2 of the companies that are now based in North Dakota that are doing these investments, or who are these folks?
No, and I can use their names, Longwater Capital, Alluvium Equity, and Broadwater Capital. They have set up headquarters here, and they bring in investment professionals, and they are working in the ecosystem, and they may see somebody hits a revenue target, or there's one of the companies that just passed $1 million in revenue. Okay, guess what? They want to actually hire for a manufacturing line, or get capital for a manufacturing line, hire more employees. That might be time where they'd be ready for seed investment. Conversely, they're talking to business owners who don't have a succession plan of a family member or an ESOP, an employee-owned company or something, and they'll say, hey, when the time comes for me to sell this business, it's 3 years from now, I'd like you to be involved. So there's a term for it called patient capital versus, going to a financial institution and getting a loan. But what they're also going to do, instead of just investing, they're going to bring some expertise to your business. How do you run your financials? How you run your CRM? How you set up your HR? So they're kind of horizontal business experts. And as they come into the state, I think that creates more effective business operators that lead to future, frankly, business productivity, employment, wealth creation for our citizens.
You know what I'd like to be involved in is naming some of these investment companies, because it seems like it's just a Mad Libs, like adjective, noun, right? And if the noun has something to do with nature, then, great. So what do we
That's
got?
right.
Rainy Brook Investments or something. I don't know. That's probably a thing. That sounds legitimate.
Probably is.
I should trademark that. So where are we in the trajectory of all this, would you say? Because we've been working on it for a while. I'm thinking about Representative Mike Nathy's bill that kind of kicked off the in-state. What was that? House Bill 1425, 3 sessions ago now? I'm forgetting.
I was in a 21 session, Rob.
Yeah. Okay. So we're kind of along how far would you say we are in implementing this? I mean, is there a way to kind of give people like a status bar indicator how far into this we are?
So, Rob, I would say from a framework perspective, we're 95% into it right now. We've got the framework set up. We've got the investment managers. We've got the policy all written. I think we're well into it. From the deployment of capital, we're going to do that over a period of time. And I would say we're probably 60% through the deployment of capital to 50 South, to Grosvenor, giving them funds along the way to make investments. So I think we still have some runway to go with the money that came out of 1425. And remember, we did make a change in the next session from 1425, where instead of 20% of the legacy fund, we changed it to a fixed amount, which ended up being $1.3 billion. So I would say we're probably a good ways through that. I think we're over half of the way through deploying that capital, either through the fixed income side, which is the infrastructure revolving loan fund, or the equity side. So I think there becomes a time down the road when we're going to look at, do we increase the amount that we have available through the infrastructure and through the framework that we've got set up right now.
So I want to ask
Chad, I'll just add.
Go ahead.
I'll just add. There has been 24 investments made with committed capital of 122 million out of the 50 South tranche, up to 250 million. So there's been really meaningful, in 3+ years, meaningful investment. The largest of which I believe is about $20 million in a very substantive company.
So that's the growth fund.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the North Dakota Growth Fund. The other fund is the North Dakota Real Assets Fund, which is what Grosvenor is managing.
And that really hasn't got off the ground yet.
No, we just established that within the last 90 days.
Right.
So that's just getting
started. No, I wasn't being
started.
critical. That's just we're
Yeah.
early days.
Get moving.
Yeah.
So sort of an open-ended question to both of you. So this is complicated, important stuff. The average taxpayer out there, their sort of frame of reference is what's going on in their home, and then they hear about the state having all this money. I think we all agree that the public thinks the state has more money than the state actually has. So how do you make the average taxpayer out there understand that these sort of investment programs are good for them and their families, short-term and long-term? Because I think these investments are important to make things better, but it's also hard for people to wrap their heads around.
Chad, I think what's important is that they need to know that we're trying to make prudent investments so that the earnings that come off of those investments are really strong. And I think that's where they see what the impact to them with the property tax relief, with the flood protection in Fargo, roads and bridges. All those come off of the earnings that are generated from these programs. So I think they need to look at this as that this is these investments are the engine that's driving these investments, and then ultimately the earnings that we can use for things that really impacts them.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
And I would just add, from a big picture standpoint, the earnings are for the benefit of our citizens today. And we've determined we're going to use a material amount of that for property tax relief for residents. And I don't know if you got your statement this week, but it was pretty cool to see. And then we are saving, it was established as a rainy day fund and to replace some revenue down the road should we ever lose a material amount of our general fund revenue.
That's what I like about doing all this.
Yeah.
Is we're not spending any. This isn't expending the legacy fund.
Right.
Obviously, to grow the legacy fund, we were always going to invest it. This is just a philosophy where let's benefit on both ends of this. We're not just going to benefit from the returns. We're also going to benefit from the investments, because rather than investing in Washington or Texas or something, we're going to invest in North Dakota, and then a win becomes a win-win.
Rob, if we wanted to expand it from 8 to 10% that it is today to a more meaningful amount, I'd love to have that conversation as a state for using our sovereign wealth fund for even, it would potentially be riskier investments, but we'd have to have that conversation. Today, we're trying to be as prudent as possible.
Sure.
And, but betting on North Dakota, so we get the economic multiplication, and we still use those earnings to benefit our citizens.
Yeah,
today.
no, and I was an advocate that we need to, invest 100% of the legacy fund in North Dakota tomorrow. I don't think that would be possible. I don't think we'd have enough places that would be good investments to do that tomorrow. We talked a little bit about, I think, mentioning sort of the patchwork of economic development programs that we have in the state. I think 108 programs at the state level, maybe more, including locals. And it made me think of remarks that we had Governor Armstrong on not long ago, and we were asking some questions sort of about his role at the head of the state investment board. And one thing that he was talking about was a need to revamp the governance structure all over these investments, because we have a part-time legislature, and I don't, A, the legislature doesn't have the time, and B, I don't think it would be a good idea to have the legacy fund. We need managers for all this. And I think it's good that we have some elected officials in that involved. But he was talking about wanting to revamp it. He says it's kind of outdated, and kind of made the same argument where over time, this has become a patchwork where we just keep bolting new things on to the mechanism. So is that something the legislature should take a look at, is maybe to streamline how we govern some of this stuff?
Rob, I'd say it like I said before. Absolutely, we need to look at how we have to have a strategy, right, amongst all the programs that we have. And I just don't think we have a strategy. I'll go back to what Chad said. We come at the end of this session and we have bills and appropriations that were put in for ideas that were brought forward by constituents that we're trying to pass through legislation and budget bills that really aren't part of a broader strategy. And I think on the economic development side, separate from the investment side, we have to establish a better strategy than what we have. I think someone had mentioned what happens in South Dakota. They really just have 2 or 3 different places that economic development funds flow out of. It's either type A, type B, or type C, and that's really what, when people come to the state and want to understand what economic development looks like in South Dakota, that's what they offer. When they come here, they're giving all these different options and they're trying to figure it out. So again, I would go back to the fact that we just need to consolidate, have a plan, and have a framework that people can understand when they want to talk about economic development, aside from all the things that are happening in the legacy fund. Because I think those are 2 separate conversations.
Yeah, I want to go back to just investments really quick, and then Jonathan, I'll throw it over to you. But I do think, I mean, obviously the two of you know this stuff inside and out in terms of the investments and the responses. What is the relationship between the legislature and Rio, and what should the relationship be in terms of the legislature being hands-on? I think there's some of your colleagues that want to be much more hands-on on this stuff, but how do you find that balance? Because I think that's very complicated. You guys have to deal with the results of what happens from the programs you pass, but at the same time, you can't be managing all this stuff. So, like, how do you balance those two things?
When you want to start with that one, and then I'll add an additional point, or I can take that one too.
Sure. Y- you know, it's complicated because you're right. There are people or legislators that want to be really involved with Rio and the operations of Rio. I think that they report to the state investment board like they should, and I think that's really the framework that we have there now, or how the state investment board operates with managing Rio. I think is the right way. I don't know that we need any more legislative involvement in that, and I think the governance changes that we're talking about, the governor was talking about, are important, but I just don't know that there'd be anything to be gained by having more legislative involvement in how Rio operates.
I think we have 6 pretty active legislators that scrutinize their work. I do believe using outside investment professionals like Grover and 50 South creates a firewall between Rio and some of the politics that happens and the legislature. Not everybody likes that, but I think it's a professional way to go about it. To the governance question, I think we had $3 billion of assets when the current governance was set up, and now we have $25 billion or something under management. We're doing some in-house investing, which I fully support because I think we save costs without giving up relative returns. But all that, to me, I would support a governance rewrite for our current state in probably the next 5 to 10 years. And then perhaps, it defines some of the roles and responsibilities of each body even more effectively.
I was going to end the interview there, but if you don't mind, I had one more question about the politics side of it. Because one thing that worries me is when you start doing this with the public's money, the politics becomes unavoidable. And I'm a little afraid that, whether it's a vendetta because maybe an investment didn't happen that somebody thought should have happened, or maybe it's an ideological thing where, you have a group, we've seen it in other states with like pension funds and that, where let's divest from fossil fuel companies, or let's divest from, companies that have anything to do with firearms or something like that, where it's investments are being driven by ideology. How do we protect against that? Because I don't want to, even though maybe I have some ideas, I like this company, I don't like that company. I mean, at the end of the day, this really has to be focused on our twin priorities, which is A, returns, and B, investing in a way that benefits the state of North Dakota. How do we protect that from, Democrats get swept into power and now we can't invest into anything that has anything to do with coal anymore. I don't want that to happen.
That's more of a risk at the federal level, where the ideology is at such a volume that that you just see that a lot. I have watched it be properly and professionally addressed through North Dakotans treating each other with respect, and maybe somebody bringing a valid concern like, hey, why can't the financial planner in my town have access to some of these assets? I know he could get us a good return. Or, hey, I see you're investing in oil well drilling, and I thought we had an anti-ESG.
Because we're going to have a fight. I think there's a proposal to invest some funds in the Davis refinery over in western North Dakota. And I have a feeling that's going to be a sort of test of your theory about whether we can all cordially navigate our way through this.
I don't mean to be a Pollyanna on that either. I just mean, I think we have created professionals in here that's why you bring professionals in to discern what prudent investing is.
Yeah, and I think when you talk about the Meridian conversation, I think Grosvenor, just by their nature, says everything is interesting when it's brought up to them. I don't know that. I think saying they're interested in it or it's an interesting project is a long ways away from investing in it.
Let's be clear. I think it was listed as a potential. Which is a long ways from we're actually putting money into it. Although
I think these investment professionals that we've hired and brought in are very critical of where they invest the money. They're not there, and which is what it should be, so we don't end up with the political wins determining where we invest the money.
Yeah. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time today. This was very illuminating.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Rob.
Hey, Plain Talk listeners, have something to say? Call or text Plain Talk with your questions, comments, or headlines you want us to cover.
Just dial 701-587-3141. Leave us your message or shoot us a text with your name and location, and you could be featured on an upcoming show.
Hi, my name is Ashley, and I am in Jamestown.
Hey, Rob and Chad. My name's Tony. I live in Grand Forks.
That's 701-587-3141.
Call us, text us, vent, praise.
We want you in the conversation. Thanks for being part of the show.
Now let's get back to today's episode.
Just finished up with Representative Jonathan Warrey, Representative Glenn Bosch. Illuminating conversation. I think the successful aspects of this, which, let's be honest, we're batting, what, 850? We have a pretty good batting average, I think, overall with these investments. Now, some of the negative ones some of the failures get attention, and they should. Don't get me wrong, but this is working so far.
I think one of the interesting things, I know the Mr. Wonderful thing is not the in-state investing, but so often it's the ones that get so much publicity on the front end that then fail. And so it's like they burn out really, really fast, and that's the ones that people are paying attention to. What's the company in Grand Forks? The Grand Forks. Yeah.
Yeah,
Like
Representative Warrey mentioned it. He didn't want to use the name, but the company's name is Thread out of Grand Forks. So they got money from the Growth Fund. They got money from the federal government. They had a lot of.
And this is a concept that's sort of driven me crazy as long as I've been going back to the Hoeven administration when, we're doing a lot of economic development, and man, there's lots of press releases when a company would announce they were coming to the state to create all these jobs. There's never a press release when they didn't.
Everybody's there to cut the ribbon.
Right.
Nobody's there when the house is burning down.
And I think there's a little bit more scrutiny of when the house burns down now than there might have used to been. But now I think we've flipped the other way, that we're not doing a good enough job of bragging about the successes that we have. And obviously both Glenn and Jonathan care about this stuff greatly. And it is a confusing thing for people to understand. Like, why are we investing a bunch of my tax dollars, and in this case, actually oil revenue, in businesses that I don't know and they may or may not work? They need to more directly connect it to, this is why you're getting property tax relief, is because of these investments.
The thing that I like about this particular approach is that the state has some skin in the game on both sides.
Right.
Typically if it's like something like the Wonder Fund, it's like, well, we invested some public dollars and then we squandered them. Well, when we're investing from the Legacy Fund, they're accountable to get a return for the Legacy Fund. Like, at the end of the day, you can look, you said, you have to get a return. Like, the Legacy Fund has to grow, and we have growth benchmarks that we want to hit. So in addition to doing these investments in a way that benefit the state of North Dakota, you also have to benefit the North Dakota by getting a good return. Some of these economic development programs, just like they're just doling out money. And if it doesn't work, we just say goodbye to the money and life goes on. They can't necessarily do that.
But maintain the program and keep putting money in.
And just keep,
And
So
I know we sort of toggled between the investments and the economic development, but there is a connection. I mean, these are economic development programs, right? Even the investment programs. What Glenn was saying about South Dakota just having a couple different gateways to economic development dollars, and then we have 108 programs, but that's just state programs, right? That's not talking about local programs or federal programs. I mean, we've got USDA Rural Development that's involved in so many of these things.
Right. And there's not a lot we can do about the feds other than maybe coordinate with them better. But there is something the state of North Dakota can do with its state programs and the programs of its political subdivisions in terms of consolidate. And that was the word, I think Representative Bosch used it several times, consolidate. That is so needed. I think the public would feel so much better about these things if they understood them, and to understand them and to make them more transparent, we've got to get them under the same, and not just under the same administration. They just got to be all the same thing. And I think also even just setting some very strict guidelines for political subdivisions about how and under what conditions they can do some of these programs as well. Some interesting things if we want to talk about,
Fargo.
this wasn't
Yep.
even on our list, but what just happened with an incentive, I think it was for an apartment development. The name of the company or anything doesn't really matter. City of Fargo said yes to it. Fargo School District in Cass County said no. I think that's the beginning, or maybe there's other examples from before, but I think that's kind of the canary of the coal mine for one of the side benefits of this property tax reform we just pushed through, which
Well,
is that
Rob, I would tell you, when I debated folks or had conversations with folks about the elimination of property taxes, one of the things I had conversations with Tony Gehrig in front of groups where one of the things we often landed on agreeing on is we need to stop getting rid of these incentives to give property tax cuts to people who were going to come anyway. In this case, they ended up pulling it out. But you know what? There's other people who are going to build apartment buildings that don't need these property tax breaks. And if we're going to cap school districts and cities and counties at 3% increase, these local political subs have figured out we have to stop giving away the farm if we want to fund our budget.
and that's a good
That's
thing.
a good thing.
And that's a good thing. Philosophically, I want tax bases that are broad and taxes that are as low as we can get them. So that's how you do it, right? You don't if you exempt people from the tax, then you're going to you narrow the base, and then you push what everybody else has to pay up. And it's time. And the 3% cap, I think one of the side benefits is it provides the impetus for them and we're starting to see it happen. And that's a positive thing. I'm very happy about that.
And I also think, doing thoughtful incentivizing of building in certain areas so we don't have to expand our infrastructure makes sense. But when you're giving anybody who's building a new thing a property tax cut, that doesn't incentivize less infrastructure. It actually incentivizes building on the outskirts of town that creates the need for more snow plows and whatever. We're to the season where everybody complains that their streets aren't plowed fast enough, but they forget about the fact that, they want their 2 acres. They want to be expanded. And that's one of the things. They want no taxes and better benefits from the government. That's not the way it works, Rob.
I think the 3% cap creates a situation where it's like, if you want this, we got to pay for it. And that's just the way it has to be. So that's a positive thing. Let's switch gears. Let's talk about our neighbors over in Minnesota. The multiple horrendous scandals in Minnesota, kind of coming to a head. I think we knew about them. In fact, I think it was one of the reasons I argued that Tim Walz wasn't a great pick for the Harris ticket. Now, later on, you sort of convinced me that maybe Walz was a good pick. I came back on that. I don't think he was a good pick. I don't think he was ever a good pick. I think Walz's political career needs to be over. I think he needs to step down. And it's not because he's a bad person. I don't think he's got a lot of the character flaws that somebody like Donald Trump has, but he's not good at his job. A fundamental part of his job is administering the state of Minnesota, and they have lost. The taxpayers have been fleeced in Minnesota under Governor Walz's leadership. It's time for him to go. Make room for somebody else.
So I told you that this is going to be fun because I disagree with you on this one. I don't necessarily disagree with your points about the fraud and that type of thing. I will also say it turns out we were both wrong about the vice president because it turned out who she picked to be vice president, it didn't matter. She was losing that election anyway. So good pick, bad pick, it didn't matter. My only pushback is I think the voters of Minnesota should decide. He's up for re-election in 11 months. Why resign? I mean, maybe he shouldn't run for re-election. Maybe that should be the advice. He shouldn't run for re-election, but I'm not sure.
I would be satisfied with that.
Yeah, but having him resign now and have Peggy Flanagan, while she's running for the U.S. Senate, become governor for the next 11 months doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, it's still the same administration. Do I think that there's some screw ups and some people are looking into this? I know that we've
catastrophic.
Yeah, you've gotten some criticism for not reporting enough on the fraud and abuse going on in our neighboring state.
In fairness, I don't cover Minnesota, the state of Minnesota, the way I cover North Dakota. Now, I'll opine at times because there are neighbors, but right. I don't cover at a granular level. I don't cover Minnesota the way I cover North Dakota.
Right, and they are getting covered in Minnesota. There's no doubt about it. That's how we know about it.
It's not for want of Rob Port writing about it.
Yeah,
that this issue is not getting attention. It's getting plenty of attention.
But, like in fear of going too far down this path, Governor Walz has delivered some significant things for Minnesota, right? I mean, so, to say that it's been a complete disaster, they have universal meals for all kids in Minnesota. We don't have those in North Dakota. You had another column making the case for it today. He's delivered family leave for working people. And I mean, these are things that I care about, and I think they're good for working people. So is there some really bad stuff going on? I haven't been following it that closely, to be honest, but I suspect there is, and that they should crack down on it. And if he chooses free election and the people of Minnesota are mad about the fraud, they should vote him out. But to have him resign right now makes no sense.
I think it makes perfect sense. I don't think we do it enough. I think leaders who cling to power long, through scandal. I mean, watching Senator Bob Menendez from New Jersey, not that the two situation, but stay in office.
Walz doesn't have any gold bricks in his.
He doesn't have any gold bars with his DNA on him for bribes.
Yeah.
I'm not comparing, but I am so tired at this resistance, because to me it smacks of partisanship. Like, I understand what you're saying. Tim Walz has a lot of policy accomplishments that you like. You're going to probably like most of them a lot more than I do, since you have a different ideology. But to me, that's beside the point. I mean, whatever other good things he may have done, this happened on his watch. This happened.
But I guess my bigger point is, what do we gain by him resigning today rather than waiting until there's an election in November of next year?
The person who is well, first of all, accountability to the public. I think the symbolism of it matters. But also, get out of the way. You didn't do a good job. This has been going on for years. It wasn't until it really started to get national attention. And first of all, and by the way, Donald Trump's handling of this, I think, has been grotesque. Yeah. From the attacks on the Somali community to the attacks on Governor Walz himself have been repugnant and unhelpful. And in some ways, though, I think they're on purpose to make Democrats want to circle the wagons around him so he stays on the ticket, which I think would be a bad mistake for.
Yeah, but the problem here is, if Governor Walz is on the ticket as the Democrat nominee in November, and you've had the president call him the R word, you've had him call Somalis garbage, and Mike Lindell is potentially his opponent, guess what? Governor Walz is getting reelected.
Right, but should he get reelected, given what's happened with this scandal?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's.
I mean, do we want to reelect somebody because we just want to put the liberal Minnesota voters want to put their thumb in the president's eye?
Well, but what's the other option? Like, if he
steps aside, Democrats nominate somebody else. There is more than one person who can do this job.
Sure. Yeah, and maybe that's the path forward. And I don't know enough about the politics in Minnesota to say he should step aside. I know there's a Senate race going on over there.
What are the politics, though? That's what I don't understand. Other than, like, he's done some things that you like.
Yeah.
I don't think that's justification for glossing over the terrible, terrible mistakes. And again, I don't think he personally had any malfeasance in it.
Sure.
I think it's incompetence. And I don't know how you just gloss that over and say, oh, why should he step down? Because he was incompetent. And there's other people who can do the job.
The other thing that I would just say is, I haven't been following the fraud stuff in Minnesota to know the details of, how bad it was and whatever.
Which you're not allowing to stop you from saying that he shouldn't resign, though.
No, again, well, that's true. I don't think he should resign, because there's an election in 11 months where the people of Minnesota can throw him out. And frankly, the Republicans, if they were smart in Minnesota politically, they wouldn't want him to resign either, because if he's as damaged as you seem to think he is, he's their only shot at winning that office in the governor's office.
I have a hard time looking at it through a political lens, because again, our political process is organized around rewarding people who can win elections, which is not necessarily the skill set that jibes with doing the job appropriately. And so sometimes I think it's okay to call on our elected officials, like, you have demonstrably been doing a bad job. It's time for you to step aside, because there's lots of people who could potentially do these jobs. And the problem is, I think people are afraid, well, if he steps down, then maybe we won't win the next election. And the minute we start down that road, it's just the same damn race to the bottom that we're always engaged in.
I think all of those points are fair, but I also think, to say he's obviously done a bad job is not fair to the accomplishments I think he's had from a policy perspective. And I think you have to balance those things out. I mean, like managing this program and having fraud, waste, and abuse. But then if you have a bunch of things that are really, really good for the citizens of Minnesota, I mean, nobody's a perfect governor, right? And again, I think that the best people to make this determination are people who actually live in Minnesota, not Rob Port and Chad Oban living in Minot and Bismarck.
I don't know, Chad.
This is fun. I like when we disagree.
I like it too, but I
will also just say, I have so much bias on this. So much. Yeah. I had coffee, my wife and I and Tim Walz, probably 2 years before he ran for VP, and I adore the guy. I think he's fantastic. I think he's personable. I think that his heart is in the right place. Has he done a good job of managing all the different things in Minnesota? Probably not. But I will lay my bias on the table. I like the guy.
Yeah. I think your bias may be allowing you to see some of this through rose. And again, I want to
fair.
I'm not going to say I'm unbiased, because I'm not. And obviously I don't have any personal animus against Tim Walz at all. He seems like a nice guy and a nice father and family man, and I don't have any problems with any of that. I do have a problem with people who are bad at their job, and I have a hard time stacking up. Well, he did universal school meals, but the taxpayers also got fleeced for $1 billion, and there's been dozens of people already put in jail because of it. And it happened despite, I mean, what's really coming out is there was clear evidence that there were problems. And I think politics is what held him back from acting. I think the fact that we were talking about a very sensitive population of people, I think there's sort of some, I don't know what you want to call it, sort of progressive, like, well, we don't really want to, it feels like attacking them, and we don't really want to attack them. And I get it, except they were committing fraud. Right. And it doesn't matter what your skin color is, or what your heritage is, or your racial background is. When you're committing fraud and you're fleecing the taxpayers, wrong is wrong. It happened on his watch. His administration could have done something about it, and they didn't. And that's enough. That's enough for me. Step down, we buy in, and the politicians love it because we buy into these personalities. They're larger than life. They're really good. They go on cable news. They say things, and they have us applauding. And we convince ourselves that it has to be them. It can't be. That's how mega is about Trump. We have to gloss over all the bad things because we can't admit that the other side might be right about something. And this smacks of that. I mean, at the end of the day, they're public servants. If they're not serving the public well, get the hell out of the way so somebody who can will.
Yeah, so I would also just say I was a little surprised when Walz said he was going to run for re-election again, and some because of this stuff, some because I think his political star sort of faded a little bit because of the vice presidential thing, it not working very well. That best case scenario is that I haven't seen Minnesota polling. I don't know what it looks like. But conceivably he just chooses not to run for re-election. And I mean, Minnesota is a strong bench of folks, and maybe that's the path forward.
That's my point. I mean, there's a lot of, and really for any office, there's a lot of people who can do these jobs. We buy into the myth that there's like some singular set of skills. I'm not saying that these jobs are easy by any stretch of the imagination, but Minnesota, North Dakota, the United States of America, we have a lot of smart, talented, capable people who could serve the public well.
Like Mike Lindell.
Not Mike Lindell. None of this is an endorsement of Mike Lindell.
But it is an interesting sort of thing what's happening on the Republican side of that race. I mean, they got like 6 people running. So clearly folks see blood in the water to want to run. And you've got like the Speaker of the House, who's a normal sort of traditional Republican. But my thought is she can't win a primary.
That's the other thing that's probably tempting for Walz to hang on is Republicans are in shambles. Right. It's going to be a tough midterm for them. And I mean, overall, I mean, even look at the mega movement's cracking up. So there's just a ton of chaos.
Now, the flip side of this, of course, is, I mean, you've got swing congressional seats in Minnesota. You have a U.S. Senate seat that's up. I mean, can you afford to have a super damaged guy at the top of your ticket, even though it's going to be a good year for Democrats?
Now all of a sudden, Democrats in swing districts are answering questions about Walz and the fraud, and do they stand with Walz? Do they throw him under the bus? There's federal money involved, so they can't just say it's a state matter. because I mean, some of those they touched on federal dollars, federal programs. It's not an easy thing. You're right. I mean, Democrats, I think Democrats should be on the line to Tim Walz telling him don't run again. But my preference would be to step down and just make way for somebody else.
Look what we just did. We just spent 20 minutes talking about Minnesota politics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Isn't that a
maybe
lot of
10.
fun?
I don't know. I like
I
the
wrote
guy.
about school meals. Well, I think it's going to win. And I think I'm right. I mean, I just think the stars are aligned for it. I think everything that's happening with inflation, grocery prices, everything that's hitting these families hard. And I say that, I mean, listen, I can afford, everybody thinks I'm being self-serving. I just want the state to pay for my kids' school lunches.
I'm not criticizing you for wanting a tax cut. I mean, like,
my family's not unusual. We've felt the crunch the same as everybody else. My health insurance costs are going up the same as everybody else. I mean, we feel like we're going backwards in terms of income because the raises that we're getting aren't keeping up with inflation. They're not keeping up with the cost of health care. I can't buy a pound of hamburger for less than $7 these days. You know, giving people a break, I just think it's going to pass. And I think the legislature, you know, there are some valid questions to bring up about the cost.
Yep.
But I think in this environment, I don't think the taxpayers are going to care.
Yeah, I think there's some valid questions about costs, and obviously I think there's some valid questions about constitution, not constitutional. But I think at the end of the day, we're talking about, it's not about feeding kids as much as it is about putting money in working families' pockets. Because, I mean, we know that kids go to school, they're going to get a lunch, and often the districts have to eat the cost of that if they're not getting paid for. The one criticism from the legislature that I think is bogus is there's some legislators who are saying people aren't going to sign up for the reduced lunch program through the feds if they already know they're going to get it free. My kid's school does everybody there gets free lunch, does a tremendous job of constantly having signups and talking to people about why they should sign up or whatever. People can do this, and there's systems in place. So to suggest that we're going to lose all of these federal funds is it's a ludicrous.
I think every parent is familiar with that bundle of forms that you get to fill out and sign at the beginning of every school year. The school, it's not that hard to add that, and it's a lot of times it's already there, but it's kind of, this is voluntary. Yeah. I think with a little messaging, with a little more encouragement, it's very easy to get families, listen, fill this out. Obviously, the lunches are covered, but in order for us to get reimbursed by the feds, we need everybody to fill this out so that everybody who's allowed to be reimbursed or qualifies for federal free or reduced gets it. A little messaging, a little more effort for some of these school districts. I
think the messaging doesn't even have to be that complicated. It can just be one of the forms they have to fill out. Right. I mean, and obviously there's concerns because school lunch participation and low and free meals is also how we identify title dollars that come to our schools. So the schools are going to have a vested interest in making sure as many parents fill these things out as possible. That's a non-concern from my perspective.
No,
I agree with you. I think this thing's going to pass. I think the messaging is important. This is about saving working families some money as stuff's getting more expensive.
If they make the Tim Walz argument, that ain't going to fly in North Dakota. I'll tell you what, that's one thing the proponents of this need to, is lecturing North Dakotans. Minnesota does it. That's a good way to make North Dakotans want to vote against this thing. So don't do that. Don't do that. All right. We're going to end it there. Hey, speaking of health insurance, we're going to have on Matt Perdue, the newly elected president of North Dakota Farmers Union, Matt Perdue. I hear he's the youngest ever elected to that position.
But here's the I don't know if he's 33 or 35. There's lots of talk about how old he is. And I don't know if you know this, Rob. He's a former Ray J. He's from up there in Ray, North Dakota. I know some other really, really great people, including a woman who lives in my house who's from Ray, North Dakota.
Do they even do birth certificates in Ray?
Oh, wow. We're taking some shots at real Williams County here. Yeah, we should actually, because we don't know if he's 33 or 35. Now we're in the weeds. We should talk about this. Let's be mad on
Matt Perdue's coming up. One of the concerns, his organization has been making some headlines talking about the impact of the expiration of the ACA subsidies on ag workers, farmers, ranchers. We're going to talk with him about that. That's coming up Friday. Remember, you can follow us on all the social media things. Plain Talk ND is our handle. Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, all the things. You can also listen to us wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. Lots of great video if you want to watch us talk. Sometimes the conversations are a little more dynamic watching there. I like watching the YouTube channel. I think it's pretty cool. All that, thank you so much for listening. We'll talk again.
Thanks, Rob.
That's it for today on Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. Plain Talk is a production of Forum Communications Company. Got a question, comment, or suggestion? Leave us a voicemail or send us a text message at 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141. If you haven't subscribed to Plain Talk yet, you can find us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. For those of you who are already hooked, give us a rating or review. And don't forget to share or tell a friend. Special thanks to my co-host Chad Oban, and from myself and everyone at Plain Talk, thanks for listening. Welcome to Plain Talk. Boy, start right off the bat. Can't say the name of the show right. Welcome to Plain Talk.